for coming back. Folks who are new to us, love to see it. Today's session, we are lucky to have Hannah with us, Hannah Morgan. Hannah's going to talk to us about internal and client communications and how to best approach that, and how to sort of have some success with it. And I can tell you from the 25 plus years that I've been working in technology, this is probably the number one skill set you need to have. You might think it's something else, but nope, this is it. So for those of you who joined today, you are definitely in for some great information and skills. Just a little bit about Hannah. She is the COO and CEO of HuronWorks, and it's an agency that works for project management, providing contracted project managers for all types of industries. She's got a bachelor's degree in urban and environmental planning from UVA School of Architecture, where she studied sustainability and people's interaction with the built environment. And she earned her MBA and project management graduate certificate from Western Carolina University in Asheville. And Hannah has worked with many clients, from solopreneurs to Fortune 500 companies specializing in this area. So it's great to have her here today. I'm going to turn it over to her and she'll take it from here. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. So I've been a big fan of Charlottesville Women in Tech for a long time now. So I am just really excited to be in this space and to be able to share a little bit about what I've learned over the past few years, but then also hear from you guys and answer any questions, have any insights that anybody wants to share. So anyway, I appreciate your time. I'm glad you're here, and I hope that it provides a lot of value to you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, everybody see that okay? Okay, wonderful. All right, so we're going to talk about internal client communication. So to give it a little bit of framework, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of being a project manager in tech myself, and thinking about this from working as a firm or as a solopreneur. So I know everybody's in different situations, whether you're a project manager or a coder or an account rep, you're always going to be communicating with your team. You're going to be communicating with your clients. So we're going to talk about some framework for how to do that effectively and some tools and best practices. All right, so we're going to think big picture overview, goals of the agenda today, problems we can solve with good communication, and then the 7 C's of communication, which is a good framework that you can build processes off of, a checklist that you can reference for your own communications, that kind of thing. We're going to look at internal communication, so establishing norms. We'll talk about meetings versus written communication, and we'll talk about some tools that exist that you can use to best facilitate that communication. And then client side. So even if you're not in a client-facing role, I think that this can still be something we can learn from. So as a project manager, I'm often client-facing, and so the way that we communicate internally and with clients is going to be very different. And if you're somebody that has to work both sides of that, then this is definitely for you. We'll talk about best practices and we'll talk about tools there. All right, so I am a CEO and a COO. So my day job is I work in the financial services industry. I work for a wealth management technology consulting company. And so it's a boutique consulting firm. And as the COO there, I have the opportunity to think big picture about our processes. And I've been able to design an ecosystem with tools and best practices that works for a team of contractors and our rotating clients. So I have a number of contractors that I'm working with that are always coming on or off projects, and then the same for clients. And so I have developed these systems and these best practices over the past few years from that perspective. And I want to make it a seamless transition for everybody coming into our team. I'm also the CEO of HuronWorks. And so HuronWorks is a company that provides fractional project management services. And so this came out of my own experience as a fractional project manager. When I was in school getting my MBA, I was doing part-time work as a contracted project manager, working with a website development team. And I brought on more clients as I finished my program, and just quickly realized that the demand for my time as a part-time project manager far outpaced the 40 hours that I had to give. And so my agency provides that part-time help that a lot of businesses need, especially for solopreneurs, smaller companies, mid-sized companies that are in a growth moment, to be able to have a flexible outsourced project manager. So we work in tech, real estate, and the arts, and that's because that's what interests me. My day today is in tech. My personal interest is in real estate, and then my husband's an artist. And so he's a glass blower actually, and trained at VCU, not currently blowing glass, but the goal is to have him blowing again soon. So one of the reasons I started my business is to help people live their best lives and design their life to work for them, right? So we often think of work as something that's holding us back or slowing us down from pursuing our passion. And so with Heron Works, I really love working with my contractors to help them design the life that they want to lead, and to have the work facilitate that. So for an example, I have a wonderful project manager on my team, and she wants to be growing flowers. She wants to be a flower farmer. And in order to do that, she needs to have some financial security. And so she has a slew of clients through my agency that she works with as a project manager on a part-time basis so that she can be building her business as a flower farmer. And she's delightful. And I am so happy to support her in pursuing that passion. And the same for all of my contractors. And then for my clients, it's the same thing. You want to design a system for your company that works for you. So I live here in Charlottesville. I moved back. I did finish at UVI. I moved back at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I have not been to a lot of in-person CUIT events, unfortunately, not just because of the pandemic, but also because I had not one, but two pandemic babies, one at the beginning and one right as the vaccines were rolling out. So I have a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old, and I love to run, paddleboard. I have a podcast about personal finance, which is a passion of mine. And I am a very boring decaf coffee drinker, and drink a lot of it. So a little bit about me there. Okay, so to frame this, I love this quote: "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place," by George Bernard Shaw. He's he wrote the screenplay for My Fair Lady. And I love this, helps us frame that communication can mean so many things to different people, but often it's really the absence that creates the problem. All right. Okay, so in this conversation, we'll be thinking about how we can create strategies and best practices to optimize our communication, and then some recommendations for tools. I love to geek out about software and tools that facilitate excellent communication and project management. And so that's something I could talk all day about. And if anybody wants to ping me, or if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to dig in deeper another time or at the end in question and answer. So I think communication is really critical for helping teams work effectively and also for helping you delight your clients. Okay, so we're looking at this from two perspectives. The client side, we can solve a lot of problems that bad communication creates, right? So wasted effort is a big issue. We're doing double work, unusable deliverables because we didn't have good communication about expectations, and then time that we're wasting providing avoidable feedback, feedback for deliverables that could have been more clear. It can create frustration with a client, misunderstanding of requests, missed deadlines, and a lack of clarity around scope or expectations. And this is a really important one for building anybody in a client-facing role. Building good client rapport is really important. So making sure that people are heard and that it's not creating this tension. Internally, we can also waste a lot of effort if we don't have good processes internally for communicating. We can create a lot of waste in our processes if they aren't well communicated. We have extra tasks, we're finding stuff, hunting files down, trying to figure out where somebody stored something. I think we've all been there. We've all been there a million times. And this can create frustration and a lack of cohesion amongst your team members if you don't have clear expectations and well-coordinated work. Okay, so a couple things, couple quotes here. I'm sure we've all heard either these or some version of this, right? Where'd you store the file? I can't find it. When is the next client meeting? I get that one all the time. Why wasn't my feedback incorporated? And who is supposed to do that, right? These are the questions that you're going to hear. And what we can do with good communication is get out ahead of questions and requests by thinking preemptively and proactively to make sure things are well organized. As a group, everybody knows where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there, what's happening in those meetings, where those assets and files are stored. And we should be able to prevent a lot of these questions. Okay, so 7 C's of communication, maybe you've heard of these before. It's a framework that we can use to think about any type of communication, whether it's verbal or video or written. This applies to any industry and any situation. So you can use this as a foundation to build good processes off of. And I also like to think of it as something of a checklist. So maybe before I'm sending a client email or something, preparing a brief, let me run through these 7 C's and make sure that I am checking off most, if not all, of the boxes. So you want your communication to be concise, coherent, courteous, complete, clear, concrete, and correct. Right. So we're going to be checking off all of these boxes before we send something out to the client, before we're onboarding a new team member. Let's use this as something to reflect on, make sure we're covering all of our bases. Okay. So we also want to make sure that our communication is fun. It's important that we're building we're building relationships with our team members, with our clients, that we're creating good team cohesion. So culture is also something that's really important. And I think that especially in this world of work from home and people living in a very virtual world, being able to make personal connections is really important. I think we've all been to that happy hour event that happened, and then all of a sudden people have that inside joke they can reference, or some personal story or tidbit that you know about your colleague that makes you feel that much closer, some sort of overlapping interest that you both identified. That's even harder when we live in this more virtual world. And so finding creative ways to foster that and to create that kind of cohesion in those relationships is really personal. And I like to think of it as bringing your full self to the table. And so we are not living in a time when we're expected to divorce completely our personal from our professional lives. I think that it's even more important, especially as we're working with teams, across functional teams in different time zones and different cultures, that we do bring an element of our personal selves to the professional workplace. Okay. All right, so we'll start digging into thinking about internal communications. So this will be for your colleagues, for your team members. Okay. Establishing norms. So this is a big one. When I first started working in the tech industry, I was onboarded to a team. I was working as a contractor, and the first thing they did is they sent me an email that said, here are all the ways that we communicate. Here are all the tools we use, and here are the expectations about how to use them. This is the type of conversation you have on Slack. This is the type of conversation you would have on email instead. This is how we communicate with our clients. And that was clearly very formative. It's something that I try to do with anybody I'm onboarding from absolute day one, is to create clarity around expectations, how and when to communicate. It creates a level playing field so that everybody has the same understanding. We're all playing by the same rules, and they're all very transparent, and we're all aware of what those rules are. So this means that there's consistency, and that people can feel comfortable jumping into the environment, having an understanding of what those norms are. So it's easy to make them go unspoken, but especially when you're thinking about joining a team or having somebody join your team, making it explicit is really important. This also helps minimize needing to manually set boundaries. So what that means is, if there is a norm that's clearly stated and written that we communicate between the hours of, let's say, 9 and 5, you're obviously allowed to work after the hours, but there's no expectation that you respond immediately. Or if you have an expectation that clients are responded to within, let's say, an hour, then those rules wouldn't apply beyond the normal office hours. This is really important for creating culture, preventing burnout, and making sure that people are aligned with their expectations. So I like to do this as the very first thing that I do with any contractor and clients too that I'm onboarding, is to make those norms, hand them that document, something that they can easily reference, something that, put it in an email, say, look at this whenever you need it. The rules aren't changing. I mean, they evolve eventually, but you can always go back and reference this. We're all on the same page there. Okay, so these norms and these clear norms should be outlining how to communicate. So like I said, which tool you're going to use and what the medium would be. So for example, we would have written communication on Slack. And we would say, this is what we're going to use for internal chatter amongst our team during a client-facing meeting, so that we can be coordinated and aligned. on what we're saying, or if there's any question that somebody needs to volley to the group without wanting to have to speak to it in that meeting. And then we would use, let's say, email with a client-facing interactions. Some teams like to use voice memos, which is a cool way to do that. You can do voice memos, you can do videos. I really love using hopping on Zoom, share my screen, and do like a very quick tutorial. If I need to show somebody how to use a platform or where to find something, I'll just make a quick 2-minute video. And I find that that's really effective. So establishing norms about how to communicate, when to communicate. So setting those office hours and setting clear expectations around responsiveness is really important. So when we're working with teams that are in different time zones, it's unrealistic to think that everybody's going to be able to work on the same time zone. And it's very rare that you would, let's say, I have seen it done, but I would say it's very rare that you would hire somebody in a very different time zone, let's say 10 or 12 hours off, and expect them to keep the same office hours. It can create a culture of burnout and prioritizing work over life, can create conflicts at home. And so I think it's important for sustainability that we do set office hours. And then for those global teams, think about when can we have optimal overlapping hours so that people aren't working through dinner time every night, or missing their kids' bedtime, or they're working an opposite schedule where they're working all night and sleeping all day. You want to have you want to have a buffer, a window of overlap. So with some of my teams that work in different time zones, I recommend that we set 3-4 hours where the expectation is everybody's online, you have responsiveness, to the tune of whatever the expectation is. Let's say everybody needs to be on Slack during those 4 hours and responding to Slack messages, responding to client messages within, let's say, an hour, whatever the norm is that you've set. Acceptable and unacceptable language. This is also something that very often, and I would say too often, goes unstated, but is important for laying out and being really clear. So like when you're talking to a client, you would want to make sure that all of your communication was well written, proofreading, and you're using grammatically correct language. And that standard might be different for Slack, where it'd be more acceptable to type briefer communications. There's no expectation to write paragraphs of text that are proofread, but it can be a few words or a few lines. You don't need to put a period at the end of every 3-word sentiment. Those kinds of things are important. And then also having established spaces for different purposes. And I love this because I think it helps people understand where it's appropriate to have different types of communication. So brainstorming is something that can happen in a Zoom call. We can set up a set time where we're going to have that face-to-face, set the norm. Everyone's going to be on camera, or the expectation people are not required to be on camera. And we're going to have that back and forth that can really best happen when you have that FaceTime and we're able to have those real-time synchronous responses. Fostering creativity. This can happen in very different ways for different people. And so I think creating space where people can do creative things on their free, their solo time, or that we can create a shared space for that. Collaboration can happen in a lot of different spaces, but setting norms of when and where that would happen. So sometimes I've seen teams do like a collaborative work time where we'll all hop on and we'll work on something together in a Zoom, and we can troubleshoot and we can talk things out. We can use Google Docs so that we can all be live editing the same document asynchronously, especially when you're working in different time zones. Everybody can hop into that Google Doc and they can contribute. Set that norm around using suggested edits in Google Docs so that you can see where people have made changes. You can comment on those changes. You can accept or reject those changes. Those are the kind of norms that can really support collaboration. One of the teams that I work with, we use Google Docs for everything. And it was a huge struggle because people were much more used to using static tools like editing a deck in PowerPoint, uploading it to Dropbox, labeling it version 1. The next person downloads it, edits it, uploads it, version 2. It can be really clunky. It can create a lot of version control issues and create a lot of wasted work, and a lot of wasted time and effort and frustration for the team. So I love creating intentional, established spaces for collaboration. But then also, conversely, it's important to have focused time and space to do solo work. So as a project manager, that's very few and far between for me because I feel like I'm always planning ahead, I'm responding, I've got things coming at me. So being able to set aside time and every day where I say, I'm not going to be responsive to Slack messages for the hour of 9 to 10, because this is where I'm going to do my proactive planning, making it really clear. And maybe that's something you can encourage your team to do or to consider doing, is to set that time aside. So as a side note, I did this thing. I love this group called Creative Mornings. We have one in Charlottesville. They do these virtual field trips. Anybody from anywhere can log in. You know, there's hundreds of people. You can take a workshop or a seminar or a session to learn any sort of random creative thing that somebody's decided to share. It can be cerebral, it can be physical, it can be professional or personal. I'm trying to think, there was one I attended on LinkedIn, one about personal style, some about journaling. And then there was one that I really loved called a cave session. And it was basically hundreds of people logged into the Zoom, and the person facilitating the session said, this set the tone for the benefits of focused, uninterrupted work. And so the idea was that he helped us understand, he talked through, you know, for 5 minutes or so, the importance of being able to do this solo work and this deep work and this uninterrupted work. And he said, okay, everybody get to your phone, turn it off. Don't just put it on airplane mode, turn it off. We're going to do a focus session for 30 minutes. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back for 30 minutes. And let me tell you, it was the most productive 30 minutes I think I've ever experienced, because I put away all of my distractions and I was able to solo focus. And so that's something that I've been implementing with some of my teams is, hey, let's have a cave session. Let's get in there. Let's do that deep work. And something about coming together, creating that space together, even if you're not actively, intentionally communicating with each other in that session, you're sharing that space. And I love that. And I definitely encourage you to do that, especially for solopreneurs or people who feel like they're a team of one, or maybe they're the only person in your department, or you're the only person that does your type of job. Find somebody from another team, find a friend, maybe find somebody from this group, and hop on Zoom and set that time aside to do focused work. I think it can be really, really productive. All right, so we're going to talk about meetings versus written communication. So they each have their own role, they each have their own pros and cons, and people each have their own preference. So with meetings, I like to think about this as something that can help build camaraderie, because you have that opportunity to have that back and forth live time. You have that chatter at the beginning and the end where people learn more about each other, comment on your background, find something that you have a similar interest. You can ask open-ended questions. And so this is where you can do some of that bigger picture thinking, some of that strategy, some of that brainstorming. When you're talking with clients in maybe a kickoff call, you can ask, why did you decide this was the moment to start this engagement? What would you like to see come out of this? Not something that they're going to sit down and they're going to write out and they're going to deliver to an email, but something that really flows off the tongue and it's going to be easier to have as part of a conversation. That's what you want to cover in meetings. You can use it to address complex issues, things that would get too muddled, you know, with written communication going back and forth, but are really better to peel apart and to tease out as a group in that face-to-face. And then dealing with emotional topics, there's a lot of nuance that can be lost with written communication. And so being able to have that face-to-face contact can be enormously valuable for sussing those things out. Written communication, this is what you can do to deliver straightforward results, things that are cut and dry. So here are the results of this study. Here's the synopsis. Here's the summary. Here's the deliverable. Hand it to them. You know, let us know what your thoughts are. Delivery. Asking specific questions, things that are much more closed loop, not your open-ended brainstorming questions. Something that requires a time-sensitive response or a deliverable that needs to be, you know, delivered. I like to send my deliverables to my clients and then say, let's set up a call once you've had a chance to review and digest on your own so that we can talk through this, instead of presenting it to them, you know, so they're seeing it cold for the first time in a meeting. And then resources that they want to have for future reference. Let's say it's a list of all your recorded meetings. It's a list of articles that you thought were helpful that you want to share with somebody, something that they can go back and reference. They don't have to be copying and pasting from like the Zoom chat while you're in a meeting. So these are things to consider when you're thinking, should it be a meeting or should it be an email, right? That's kind of a joke, right? Is it this meeting should have been an email? Be intentional about how you use that time and space and people's attention. So here's a couple of things to give us a reminder that everybody has a different perspective about these things. So they say that face-to-face requests and interaction is 34 more times effective than an email. So if you're in a call and someone says, hey, can you do this thing? Supposedly it gets 34 more times more effective in getting actual action. I think this is different for everybody, so take it with a grain of salt. 36% of people don't believe the volume of email they receive is appropriate for their role, and 27% of all meeting time is wasted. I think we can all see ourselves somewhere in that spectrum, right? I get too much email, spend too much time in meetings. It's a balance. One thing that we want to think about, especially that's come to the to the front of our minds with the pandemic, has been how meetings, especially Zoom meetings, can create and perpetuate inequity and bias in the workplace. And so people may feel uncomfortable sharing their surroundings or their appearance, or feel like they have to get camera ready for a meeting. And the expectation of what professional is can be different depending on your culture. And so let's think also intentionally about how having meetings, especially over Zoom, can perpetuate those biases, and also how having meetings in person can, especially in a hybrid work environment, can mean more time, more travel time, less work time, more time away from your family, cost associated with those travel to get to those in-person meetings. There's a lot of factors there, and we need to be aware of how it affects people differently. And then lastly, so they say meetings have increased by almost 70% since right before the pandemic. So we are a meetings heavy professional culture these days because it's so much easier to connect with people. So don't get complacent. It doesn't always have to be a meeting. It should be as a result of intentional choice. And if you're in a role as a project or operations manager and you're the one making the decision, I encourage you to think really intentionally about that. Okay. If you are going to have a meeting, successful meetings rely on being prepared. That is a huge indicator of success. So prepare for the meeting in advance, share your agenda, put it in the invitation of the event invitation, send it out by email, post it in the chat, whatever it is, make sure that people have the agenda preferably in advance. And I learned this lesson actually recently the hard way. I was reminded of this lesson when I didn't send the agenda out to a client for a meeting and they sent me an agenda. And I was like, wait a second, this is my job. They came in feeling like there wasn't an agenda set and they needed to take the energy and the time to fill that void to shape the conversation. They didn't need to because I had, but I hadn't effectively communicated in advance. We're going to take care of this. We're running the meeting. You just need to show up, answer questions, tell us how you're thinking about this project as we kick it off. Setting expectations can be really important so that everybody knows what they're walking into, what they need to be contributing. If it's the kind of thing where you want to have people brainstorm in advance and bring their ideas, let them know so that they can know what to show up to in the meeting. Let them know if it's going to be on video or not. That's another thing. So everybody shows up and they're feeling ready to be on camera, or they know that that's not the expectation. They can save that 5 minutes to not get ready or whatever it may be. And then making sure the right people are participating. So I see this optional if anybody uses Outlook, there's this optional slot. You can invite people to a meeting and they're not required to attend. It's like, very rarely do we find ourselves attending meetings that we're not supposed to be in, required to be in, or there's value in being in. So think intentionally about who needs to be there that's going to add value and get value out of the meeting. Don't invite more and don't invite fewer people than that. Being prepared with all your materials, preferably distributing them through your team in advance, also helps set those expectations. And then outlining any decisions that need to be made, whether you share this explicitly with your group or it's something that you prepare walking into the meeting so that you have that list. Know that you are going to be making these decisions. You need to walk out of that meeting with the decisions made. Okay. After a meeting, just as important, having successful follow-up. You want to identify those action items. What needs to happen to complete this? Who is responsible for completing it, assigning an owner, and then make it time bound so that there's a date on the calendar if you use a project management software. Oh, nobody told me that I wasn't advancing the slides. I'm so sorry. I was advancing the slides on another screen. I'm so sorry. Please let me know next time. Okay, so action items, owners, and time-bound deliverables is very important. So next steps, who's gonna take it over the finish line? Okay, so let's talk about tools that we can use to facilitate internal communication. This is the stuff I really nerd out on. You want to think about who participates in each system in your ecosystem, each platform, what's communicated on each platform in each tool, and when you're expected to reply or engage in the tool. Okay, so I've broke this down into 3 different categories. So we can think about chat, email or other written communication, and project management software. So with chat, this is going to be where you send your quick brief messages. You can use it to sync up during meetings or just quick back and forth. You can use it to share ideas asynchronously. If you're not familiar with Slack, that's a tool I really love. It allows you to create teams based on projects. And so you can have a channel based on each project where you can contain the information to that project. You can always go back and reference it. And then you can share files and photos that are ephemeral, so they don't need to be housed somewhere for reference in perpetuity. So with email, you're looking at this as a tool for more complex, more detailed, longer messages. I find that this is often the preferred method for some of my clients, especially in the industry I work in, delivering more complex concepts and deliverables. So instead of that quick one-off, this is where we're going to have more complex things conveyed, and then sharing files of value, something that you want to be able to go back and reference. Project management software can do a lot of the heavy lifting for both of these functions, so with chat and email. And so you can have messages that are associated with specific tasks for each project. You can share files that are easily referenceable, that they live there, they're organized, they're well named, and you always know where to find them. You can use it to coordinate with your team. You can also create a client portal so that you can share assets with your clients. And then you can use that as a quick snapshot to always know where the task or the project is, if it's on track and on time. All right, so these are a couple tools, just a very small smattering of the ones out there. So for chat, I love Slack. Some people use Google Chat if you're a Google Suite kind of team. Written communication, Gmail, Outlook, Microsoft Teams. There are plenty others out there, but these are just three that I run across pretty commonly. Two are email, and then the other one is for, it's like a communication platform. And then project management software. So Asana, Monday, Jira, Notion. I also use Teamwork, Trello. These are really popular ones. I find that most project management softwares have similar functionalities and similar capabilities, or overlapping capabilities, I should say, but it's really about the user experience that is where it becomes dramatically different. So you're going to have a similar functionality with Asana and Monday. Jira, I find to be completely different. The norm, Jira is more used in tech-heavy environments, especially with developers. I find that developers typically don't love using Asana and Monday, but that's more preferred for the non-tech folks. All right, and this is just based on my experience. I'm sure everybody has their own experience with the tools. Okay, so we're going to think about, as we're selecting a tool, we're finding a tool, we're building our ecosystem of tools, we're going to be considering the cost of each tool. They usually have like a freemium where you can have up to so many users. Are free. This is great for solopreneurs if you're working on your passion project and you want to set up a project management tool to keep yourself on track and to house your resources. A lot of times you can get these for free if you just have 1 or 2 users. You might have limited capability, but it's a good way to try things out, see if you like it. And they can get really expensive, especially when you're thinking about enterprise solutions. Ease of use is enormously important. It needs to be something that people feel comfortable navigating and will actually use. Integrating with other tools that you use, that can be really helpful. And then what's standard in your industry, what people, like I said, you know, a lot of coders use Jira, and it can really just vary depending on what industry you work in. Okay, so that's internal communication here. We'll hop into our client side communications. All right, so if anybody's a fan of Mad Men, I'm a huge fan. There's this amazing moment where these 2 people who are account reps, it's a show set in the 1950s, 2 people are account reps and one is being promoted over the other. And the rationale is, it's not that you aren't meeting your client needs, it's that the person who is being promoted, they say, has a rare gift of making them feel as if they never have any needs. And I love this, and I try to reference it personally as my guiding star, that anticipating needs can really help deliver a seamless client experience. It can also minimize a lot of those questions and issues that we talked about earlier. So a couple of best practices that we'll run through. So having very clear language, checking yourself, run it by a team member before you send it to the client. Make sure that if somebody who is not familiar with your norms as a culture, as a team, can hop in, read this communication, know exactly what you're talking about. You need to know your audience. You need to know who you're talking to, how they're best going to process information, and what they are, how they're going to hear things best. And then you need to listen to their needs as well. And I encourage also to think about closing that loop. Not only are you listening to their needs, but you're reflecting them back to them. So this is just a snapshot from my website. I love to have a discovery session with my clients when they first, as our first touch point, after a little bit of back and forth to just make sure we're aligned on basic stuff. Having that discovery session where we can chat, I can ask the questions, I can hear people's needs, and then I'll send them a summary email afterwards, making sure that I reflected what we had talked about together. That all feels like it is pretty basic and straightforward, but it's not always the way that people think. And I found, as a project manager, these are a couple ways that you can really delight your clients and make sure that they're not wondering what's coming next. Okay, so when you are communicating with your clients, be explicit about the goal of any communication. It may feel silly in the moment, but I really find that opening a meeting by saying the goal of this meeting is to make this decision, uncover this issue, to dig into, to learn more about your processes, to discover, discuss the results that we delivered last week, et cetera. Be super clear about why we're here. That'll really help shape the tone. Responding promptly is really important. Like I said earlier, having expectations around when you're going to respond internally, but also with your clients. I find that setting realistic expectations around response can really shape the culture. So with my team, I suggest a 4-hour or half business day response window with clients, even if it's just to acknowledge receipt and say, hey, I got your email. I really appreciate it. I don't have the answer for you right now, but I'll circle back with you, or I'll ask somebody on our team. Let me dig that up. I can't find it right now. Whatever it may be, acknowledging receipt within a timely manner can be really important. So they're not wondering, did they get, what are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Like, what do we need to do to make this happen? It can also help you set professional boundaries. And so that's really important with clients, like not answering the phone after a certain hour, being expected to answer the phone. Be really clear about what those boundaries are. If you don't work past 5 p.m. and they're expecting a response from you, being really clear about when you are responsive. Set the vacation auto reminder on when you go on vacation so it doesn't leave them wondering. And then also, I really encourage making a personal connection with your clients can go a really long way. Finding overlapping interests and shared goals. I was just on a call the other day with a client and we discovered that we both have a love for Marie Kondo. That's really fun when you get to dig into that stuff. It doesn't have to all just be business. It's important to have those personal connections too. And that's done through effective communication. Establishing trust, right? On the more human side, we can talk about the technical aspects of the results that we're delivering, the communication that we're doing, that we're using, but ultimately we're all human beings, and establishing trust and good relationships is critical for good communication and should be a goal and an outcome of our communication. Being honest, I don't know the answer to that. I don't have it for you. I can't find it. I'll have to get back to you. Those are all really important things to just remind ourselves that we're all human. And if we can come at it from a perspective of humility and honesty, that's critical. And people really appreciate that, especially clients. Okay, so we can offer all of these tools for communicating with our clients that we're going to dig into a little more, but ultimately we want to meet them where they are. So knowing your audience, knowing how they communicate, and fitting into their expectations within reason, without exceeding your boundaries is important. Okay, there's a couple different methods you can use for client communication. So these are a few I use all the time. Having a weekly status meeting. Some clients love to have that face-to-face time. Sometimes you can push it out every 2 weeks, just having a touch point on the calendar, 30, 60 minutes to touch base and make sure everyone's aligned, deliver intermediate results, ask for feedback, give updates, etc. Some people really thrive and deliver and process information much better in that setting. Status report can accompany those meetings or be instead of. This is just a quick screenshot. You want to talk about what happened, what's coming up, discussion items for the conversation, red flags, bottlenecks, accomplishments, documents delivered. All that can go in your status report for reference. You can use a tool. This bottom right-hand corner is a screenshot from the Asana tool. You can use a client portal. A lot of those project management softwares have either explicit client portals or ways that you can set up limited access so clients can access the project management tool. That can be really helpful. And then having a project kickoff and a project wrap, that's pretty standard. I've recently been incorporating the mid-project scope review, enormously helpful. It's a touch point in the middle of the project. You can make sure you're all aligned and that everybody's expectations are being met. And you can pivot before reaching the end and having an unhappy client. Proactive communication. Okay, you can use all the same tools for your clients. Incorporating them into your project management software is definitely an option and something that I would recommend exploring if you have clients that are tech savvy and interested in popping into your ecosystem. If they're not, just make it as easy for them as possible. Ask them what the best way to communicate with them is. I use almost all of these tools on a daily basis. It doesn't feel like a huge lift to switch between software. Instead of trying to fit them in, I'll say, this client likes emails, this client likes meetings, this client likes the portal. That's okay. We're going to meet them where they're at. And then when we're thinking about all these different tools, we want to think about what's actually going to be used. If you set up a client portal and your client's never going to log into it, it doesn't do any good. It's wasted effort there. And it's an unfortunate misalignment of expectations because it creates disappointment. You say, did you see this? They never even log into the portal. Use something that everybody can actually use. It should be easy to navigate, and it should be really intuitive. And then also you want to think about what capabilities it has. Some of these tools have more complex capabilities where you can comment on specific tasks. You can show what your resources are that are scheduled for each project. You can show them a Gantt view. Just depends on what you want to share with your client. Okay, when you're using a client portal, these are a couple of capabilities I find to be key. Sharing documents and assets is great. It always lives somewhere. It is somewhere that's easy to find, quick reference. You can have statuses on all of your deliverables for quick reference. They can log in, they don't have to ask, they don't have to ping you. They can submit questions or requests through the portal or ping you on certain tasks if it's unclear, if they need an update. You want to get as much information out in front of them, easily delivered in an easily digestible manner so that you can minimize some of those questions, but you're always gonna receive some questions. You wanna have a clear way of receiving them. Say, send an email, put it through the portal, whatever it may be. They can provide feedback on your deliverables. That can be a really helpful thing to use the client portal for, tracking progress on their projects and then submitting change orders. So if you need to pivot the project and change the scope, you can do that through a client portal. That's one idea. Okay, so just wrapping up here, you may have heard subject line addition. I think we've all received an email like this. This is a screenshot of one that I got the other day. Heads up, this is not helpful to get a subject line that says anything this vague, a few thoughts, ... that is a real one that I've gotten. What's going on with this project? We've all gotten that. What project? Who are you? What's going on? That's not a helpful subject line. So let's talk about that. Okay, so in your email content, if you're using email to communicate with your clients, and this can apply to other mediums as well, think about it, extremely descriptive subject line. I like to say the name of the project, exactly what I'm going to be asking. So it'll be name of the project, scheduling, kickoff call, and then make that subject line so they know exactly what they're getting into when they open it. Label your links very clearly. So if you just copy and paste your link in, it can be really messy and look kind of janky. Label at this bottom right corner right here. It can just give you an example. I encourage having a naming convention for all of your attachments and for your links, because it just, even if you're the only one that uses it, you can share it with your team if you want to, but having a naming convention creates consistency. It makes it easier to search for things, and it makes it super clear what you're sending them. So this may feel really elementary, but I can't tell you how many times someone sent me, through my agency, I've gotten hundreds of resumes that people submit to me. And more than half of them are labeled with something that's not helpful in the name of the attachment. It'll be like resume. Like, okay, I don't know whose resume this is. How am I going to file it? I have to rename that. You'd be amazed at how often that happens. And that varies depending on what role people are in, if they're considering who their audience is when they're sending an attachment. So when you're in the driver's seat and you have the opportunity to be super, super clear with your clients, absolutely take advantage of that. This is your moment. So Heronworks, competitive analysis, the name of the project, the name of the firm, the date, if the contract has been executed, if it's been signed, if it's been edited, what version it is, put that all in the name of the attachment. Highly recommend that. That was definitely something I learned trial and error over the years. Okay, and then after a meeting or after a discussion, after you're in a pivot point, maybe that mid-scope review meeting or a client kickoff, provide a summary of the discussion to your client. This is really critical so that you can both reference it, but it also creates something that you can lean on going forward and say, this is the decision that we made. This is what we talked about in this call. Outline your action items extremely clearly. Make sure that they're assigned to specific people, preferably make them time bound. Clearly, I didn't do that in all of these. And provide a status. So done, in progress, whatever it may be. If you're not using a project management software for your clients, this can be a really easy and graceful way to deliver all the information they need in a very digestible format straight to their inbox. Yeah, make it time bound, make it associated with somebody. And yeah, there we go. Okay. That's it. So ending on email. I realize we have about 10 minutes left. So I would love to take any questions or field anything that somebody wants to dig into deeper. I've just been talking a lot, which is kind of unusual for me. So I want to hear what's going on. What are people's thoughts?
Fantastic presentation. A challenge that our team has is what I call alphabet soup. How do we convince people not to do that? Because one set of abbreviations can mean 12 different things.
Yeah, I love
Especially in-
this. Yeah, I love this. So the alphabet soup is referencing when there are acronyms for concepts or companies or an acronym for anything or a shorthand for anything that's looks like alphabet soup when you put it all together. So I work in the finance industry. I hear this all the time. It drives me nuts because I'm not a subject matter expert. I'm often Googling things. If you've ever tried to Google an acronym, there's usually 100 different things it could mean. So to combat that, I definitely recommend writing that. If you as a team, if you're a leader in your team, write up all those acronyms, what they mean, and post it somewhere so that it's just like your communication norm, easily referenced. So it can be something you can always look at. You can send it in your onboarding packet to your new team members. You can update it as things change and language evolves. Language is a reference, as a reflection of our culture. And so language is always going to evolve. Update it, make sure it's current, and that it's a resource so everybody can be on that level playing field and you don't have to waste effort feeling like you're behind or you don't know what people are talking about. So make it really clear for people. Does that help?
It's more of how do I convince my team not to use alphabet soup?
Yeah. So, well, I think that really depends on the context. So if you're working like internally as a team and everybody knows what all that alphabet soup is, write up your list, have it easily referenced, remind people to try to say the full words, but also remember that language can be very exclusionary. And so if even just one person doesn't know what one of those things mean, it can create a feeling of lack of confidence, imposter syndrome. This is just one really easy way that we can lift each other up and create a more inclusive environment. So even if it just means, hey, could you spell that out, even though you know what it means, ask somebody to spell out what they say and see if you can shift the culture a little bit towards being more clear in those communication.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of when you have a client and you're trying to get them to use some of the tools, it's really important, as you say, to meet them where they're at. But in my experience, it's been difficult to get them when they're uncomfortable with technology to begin with.
Yeah.
To have any movement and find a middle ground when the technology is really what they need for their business. So how is it, have you found ways to, I've tried the route of educating them and showing the benefits of why using a system is helpful, but there can only be so much training in a sense. So how do you navigate that, or what can you do, or do you ask them, like, maybe you want to hire someone? Like I found myself kind of at a loss at a certain point of how can we implement these processes that really do help a business thrive if the person at a certain level isn't willing to invest or move themselves.
Yeah, if they're not willing to adopt it, it's going to create problems, right? I mean, I always think like the best system is the system you actually use, right? Like I have tons of systems that I've set up that I've never really used, or it feels like a lift every time. It doesn't feel intuitive. It doesn't feel natural. The list lives in my brain. It doesn't live in the project management software. That's not doing what it's supposed to do. I think it takes time. I think it takes compassion. I think it can take kind of doing those sessions. It can take doing them multiple times to walk through it. I love doing like hopping on Zoom and doing a quick recorded session to help somebody push through, because I find a lot of times people who are resistant to adopting new technology really want that hands-on help, but it's so hard to deliver virtually. And so if you can hop on Zoom, do that thing where you share your whole desktop instead of just the application, and you can show them, go to start, go to application, click on this, new file, new project, and you can really walk them through it, make it bite-sized, like 2 minutes, so that it's really easy for them to be able to reference that. I think that can be really helpful. But ultimately the adoption is going to be up to them. And the most you can do is to encourage them, like you said, help them see the benefit. I also think that like living in the system is a term that I hear and use a lot in the spaces I work in. And so think about using that system as your home base. So when they ask you, where's that asset? You say, it's in the software, it's in the tool, it's associated with the task. And instead of, maybe emailing them it every time, encourage them, send them a link, email them a link. That's a great one. Like email them a link that links to the tool. It opens up in their browser, and make it really, really easy for them. But if all of your resources live there and you can provide what they need there, they're going to see the value eventually, or maybe they won't. And maybe it's time to look at another tool. Like that's another idea too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah,
Thanks.
good luck with that client. I've been there. We've all been there a million times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I used to live and work in Southwest Virginia as a community organizer, I worked with really rural communities that had very limited access to technology, really delayed access to Wi-Fi or high-speed Wi-Fi. And so back then, email was kind of the only tool that was used for asynchronous communication that was widely adopted. And it was a huge lift for people. It meant going to the library. It meant like dial up. It meant borrowing someone's computer. And so we would do these workshops where we taught people like basic computer skills, and we would do one-on-one mentoring. Like we would each sit down with somebody and say, what are your questions? And I will never forget the day I taught a woman how to copy and paste. And like, I think she was about to cry with relief. Like, you mean I don't have to type it every time? So it's like, let's meet people where they're at and like maybe help them grow if they want to a little bit towards this, if it is really going to help them. Yeah. I hope that works out well with your client, Elizabeth. And I'm always happy to chat about it offline too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And we might have time for maybe just one last question. We only have a couple more minutes left, and then I'll wrap us up. Any last questions?
Well, thank you guys so much for joining today. I'm so flattered that you chose to share this hour, and I hope that there was some value I was able to deliver, and maybe something, a fresh perspective or a new way of looking at something, a new tool you hadn't thought about, maybe a new best practice that you're going to use in the future. I hope that there's something that helps you going forward professionally. And yeah, feel free to drop me a line. I don't know if my contact information was in the promotion of the webinar, but it's just Hannah at Heronworks LLC. I'll put it in the chat. I love to talk about this kind of stuff and nerd out, and I'm happy to always troubleshoot or problem solve. So yeah, just drop me a line and let's talk about it. Let's dig in.
Thank you, Hannah. I know I speak for everyone when I say that their presentation was not only chock full of great information, but was well executed. It was very clear and concise. And I've been communicating for a really long time, but I loved some of your tips. The onboarding and setting expectations. And I think also for this group, really knowing that boundaries are okay. As long as you set expectations with your clients, they get it and they will be fine with that. But if you don't set that expectation, then you're never going to have it. And so I think those are some really, really good tips. I really loved what you had to share with everyone. So
thank you.
We will, if you do want to communicate to everyone, we can always post it in our newsletter later because we'll highlight. So just let Katie know, Hannah, if you want to get that out. And otherwise, thanks everyone for joining today on a Thursday before Memorial. We know we were testing the timing there, but it was great to see everyone virtually. And for those of you who want to connect in person, our next Charlottesville Women in Tech event on June 29th. I hope I get that date right, is going to be in person. It's actually our annual birthday event, which we'll be able to do in person. And we're also going to take the time at that meeting to kick off cohorts. So we're going to create these smaller cohorts of CWIT members to sort of branch off and create their own little smaller subgroup of connections and networks. So do sign up for that if you have the time. We'd love to see everyone in person. And otherwise, thanks for joining today. Everybody have a great rest of your week and a great Memorial weekend. Thank you again, Hannah, so much for participating today.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. Happy weekend.
Bye, everybody.